Let's turn to John chapter 1 for our message this evening. Bible study, whatever you want to call it. We have several verses in different places, and so it may turn into somewhat of a Bible study tonight. But John chapter 1 and verse number 6 is where I want to draw your attention for just a few moments this evening. John chapter 1 and verse number 6. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. The same came for a witness to bear witness of the light, that all men through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. Of course, that's a capital L there, so that's talking about Jesus himself. That was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name, which were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. I want to use that phrase there, or the statement made in verse number 11. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. And I believe that sometimes we just need a little reminder, which is just all I'm giving to you basically this evening, is just a little reminder that we need to recognize how easy it is when we're so blessed, so privileged with God's presence, and He's reached out to us, and He's given us so many wonderful opportunities to follow after Him and to know His blessing and His help. And yet, how often do we overlook that? How often do we just sort of go on our way and we don't really think a whole lot about what He has done for us? Let's think about that a little bit this evening. Maybe I could kind of begin by asking you this question, and I'm afraid the answer for me is not exactly what I would wish it would be. But how observant are you? How observant are you? Oh, I would like to say that I pick up on things so well, and, I've told you this before, but sometimes I am so easily distracted, I guess, or something, and I just miss stuff. I mean, it might be laying right there beside me, and I'm looking for it, but I somehow just look right over. I don't look like I should, I guess, and I miss it. Maybe it's a detail. I've thought sometimes, if there was a crime that happened around me, could I even tell what color vehicle that was? That happened just not long ago. Not a crime, but somebody asked me, was such and such a vehicle out there? Well, let's see. There was a vehicle there. What color was it? I couldn't even remember. I'd just been there, but I couldn't remember even the color of the vehicle for sure. It seemed like, I think maybe it's kind of this color, that color. I don't even think I had it right, really. Maybe it was another one nearby that was sort of that color. Anyway, the point is, I'm just not very observant. Maybe you are. I've thought I would like to be. I'd read the mystery stories, and whether it's Sherlock Holmes or Hardy Boys or something when I was a kid, I wanted to be real perceptive, but I don't seem to be. Don't ask me what you wore last service. I don't know. In most cases, I just don't even pay attention. And sometimes we miss the obvious things. I'm afraid that happens even spiritually. We're here at Christmas, and we might notice all the different events and activities and all the stuff that happens, and we can even, in a sense, we can recognize the details of the story. We can say, oh, I understand. Yeah, this is what happened. But it can be easy for us to kind of get careless with the details of Jesus coming and Jesus' purpose and what it means for us today and how much I need Him. Yeah, I know we know it matters that He came, and we know that it makes a difference, an eternal difference really for us, but how often do we really focus on it? How often does it really mean something to us? We could talk about, observing certain days, but is it really something we observe? I know people just debate all sorts of stuff. Was He virgin born? And what time of the year did it really happen? And all those things. But really, the bottom line is that His was a life-changing event that requires our attention and really our action even today. We need to think about that. We need to recognize it again even this Christmas time. And notice who the verse specifies here. He came to who? The heathen? He came to those who didn't have any idea about Him? No, it says He came unto His own. The ones who should have known. The ones who should have expected Him. That's who he came to. They should have recognized him. Sometimes I enjoy seeing examples, YouTube or wherever. I might see a little snippet of someone, maybe a famous person, and they get all in disguise, and then they go out on the town. Maybe if it's a sports person, I know one I saw was a soccer star, and they go out there and they are playing around, kind of in the street, and wait to see who might come to join them. Maybe another one was in basketball, and they're just going out there in disguise and acting like they're maybe an old person, not able to do much, maybe a little bit heavy even, and they do all this stuff, and then nobody seems to recognize them until they take their disguise off. And then everybody wants to clamor to be around them or get his autograph or whatever it may be. You know, that's kind of the way they respond. I kind of enjoy those little things, but it's not so funny whenever it's that we don't recognize really what Jesus means to us or how much we need him. We don't recognize the significance of the story. And so like verse 11, you might say he could come to our church today and we wonder, well, would we receive him? Would we welcome him? Would he pinpoint some things in our lives and we say, you're off your rocker, you don't know what you're talking about? That's kind of what happened with the Pharisees. And I want to just sort of remind us tonight and urge us tonight that we don't get too carried away thinking we've got this all put together. We don't recognize what Jesus would say to us. Maybe we wouldn't even want to receive him ourselves. Yes, Jesus came to his people, could we say, quote unquote, his people. And they didn't recognize him. They rejected him. And so this evening, maybe we could just kind of look at this passage here, this particular verse anyway, in segments, kind of just call your attention to a few different ideas here. And kind of, we'll probably touch on a few other verses. So if you want to just keep your Bible handy, it might be helpful. But let's look at God's faithfulness to his own. Let's look at how he wants to step in. And then, of course, the cold rejection that he got whenever he did come. And then perhaps even his power to make us sons of God. And ultimately, obviously, we have to apply this to our own lives. And so let's try to do that for a few moments here this evening. First of all, he came unto his own. Obviously, that's there. That's part of the verse. He came unto his own. And if we were to look back in Old Testament history, we could probably start seeing numbers of examples. Now, I know it's easy for us to see them when we're looking back on them, and they probably didn't notice it as easily then. But he did. He proved himself over and over. And you see God's dealings in a number of different ones. We could just call a few. Noah, for example, and all that he did to reach out to his people. Many rejected him. Abraham, God reached out to him. God tried to continue. And of course, with these men, they responded. But the people around them maybe didn't even accept or recognize the significance. But God reached out to Abraham as well. And of course, Isaac and Jacob, the patriarchs of that time. Then you can go further on. You find Moses. And again, God stepping in to deal with his people and to help them. Fact is, remember how Moses was sort of that intercessor and saying, oh Lord, please don't blot them out. You know what the nations around us would say. Would look like you didn't have the power to come through for your people. And God held back the judgment. And then, of course, you have others like David or even Daniel after the captivity or during the captivity. So you have some of these different ones, and you just see how God stepped in, and God had his men. God had those that he could reach out through to prove that he cared for his own. He came unto his own by using these different ones over and over. Of course, we could mention a number of other examples. You have some of the prophets like Samuel or Elijah or Elisha or some of those. And so you have those examples as well. But then you see even God's working through their rebellion. And when it seemed like they were just going so far away from God, yet still he would show mercy. Sometimes you read some of even the minor prophets. I know they're a little difficult to read sometimes, but you read some of the minor prophets and you think, how would God even still offer any sort of hope after all of their sin, all their idolatry? And yet he was. He tried to come to them. He was reaching out to them over and over. Just real quick, you can go back to Numbers chapter 21. I'll try to do this quickly, but I'll just mention a few to you here. Numbers 21, verses 5 through 9. And the people spake against God and against Moses. Wherefore have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no bread, neither is there any water, and our soul loatheth this light bread. And the Lord sent fiery serpents among them, and they bit the people, and much people of Israel died. Therefore that people came to Moses and said, We have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against thee. Pray unto the Lord that he take away the serpents from us. And Moses prayed for the people, and the Lord said unto Moses, Make thee a fiery serpent, and set it upon a pole, and it shall come to pass that every one that is bitten, when he looketh upon it, shall live. And Moses made a serpent of brass, and put it upon a pole. And it came to pass that if a serpent had bitten any man, when he beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. Then you find also over in John chapter 3 that Jesus even said, as Moses put up that serpent on the pole, Jesus, he's talking about himself, the Christ, the Messiah, will be up on a pole, so to speak, as well, and will bring about the healing of the nations. And then you go back to the book of Judges as well, Judges chapter 2. Judges is basically a story from end to end almost of Israel's disobedience and then God reaching out to them and then them coming back to the Lord. In Judges 2 and verse 12, you read, And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods of the people that were round about them, and bowed themselves unto them, and provoked the Lord to anger. And then verse number 18, And when the Lord raised them up judges, then the Lord was with the judge, and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For it repented the Lord because of their groanings, by reason of them that oppressed them and vexed them. So even though they needed judgment, God was reaching out in mercy to bring about the judges. And then over in the book of Hosea as well, one of those little prophets that I mentioned to you. But Hosea, actually we won't read probably much of anything there, but we could just take that whole thing there. But I'm just going to read just a little bit here. O Israel, return unto the Lord thy God, for thou hast fallen by thine iniquity. Take with you words and turn to the Lord. Say unto him, Take away all iniquity and receive us graciously. So will we render the calves of our lips. In other words, sort of the sacrifices that we would give. Verse 4, I will heal their backsliding. I will love them freely, for mine anger is turned away from him. It's just, again, a story that God wants to restore. Came unto his own. He tried to reach them. Really, if we would think about it, God has been awfully gracious to us. Far more than we deserve. He's reached out to us over and over and over again. And we ought to question, maybe sometimes in our own mind, are we really, truly trusting him as we should? Are we really, truly putting our whole confidence in him? Are we allowing him to have his way in our life? Or are we turning a blind eye? Or we're not ready to receive what he has for us? He came unto his own. But we read that his own received him not. His own received him not. Maybe we could understand at least a little bit. I don't want to make too much allowance here, but we might be able to understand a little bit of the tendency of the children of Israel to stray away from God when they couldn't see him. The foreign nations around them may have had their own individual gods, and they would trust in them, and you could see them. And maybe you could understand a little bit of that. But when Jesus walked among them in the New Testament, he did all these miracles. He taught them with power. How do you excuse that? Really, I'd say the rebellion in that case was inexcusable. And so you can go to different places here. Luke chapter 4 is one place. I may not read all these. I'll call attention to them. But Luke 4:24, and he said, this is Jesus, Verily I say unto you, no prophet is accepted in his own country. Verse number 28. And all they in the synagogue, when they heard these things, were filled with wrath, and rose up and thrust him out of the city, and led him unto the brow of the hill whereon their city was built, that they might cast him down headlong. But he, passing through the midst of them, went his way. So here they're trying to kill him before it was really time. And then over in John chapter 10 and verses 30 through 33. Let me just go ahead. I might go ahead and just try to read them quickly for you. Then the Jews took up stones again to stone him. This is talking about Jesus. And Jesus answered them, Many good works have I showed you from my Father. For which of those works do ye stone me? The Jews answered him, saying, For a good work we stone thee not, but for blasphemy, and because that thou, being a man, makest thyself God. They wouldn't believe. And then even over to Luke chapter 20. Luke chapter 20, verse number 14 is where it begins. I won't read all this, but it talks about the husbandman who was wanting to cast, or the master of the vineyard sent the son to the keepers of the vineyard to get the fruits of it. And they decided, well, we want to just kill him and get rid of him so that we can have the vineyard for ourselves. Very clearly, he's talking to them about their own need, and they were upset about it. They didn't like such lessons against themselves. And go back there for just a moment here, real quickly. And in verse number 19, they were seeking to lay hands on him. They wanted to try to destroy him then too, and so they wouldn't receive him. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's the way we feel, but I do want us to recognize that sometimes when God would like to really speak to us, when the truth would come close and searching in our own lives, and we would recognize that we may have a need, sometimes we're too quick to kind of try to get our righteous robes all wrapped around us and make ourselves feel good, and that, well, surely we're just fine, and don't you say anything against us. It's always somebody else that has the problem. Sometimes we need to recognize that God may want to speak to us, and if we're not careful, he comes to his own, but his own won't receive him. God help us. But let's notice quickly the final section here. He does talk about, as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. Not everybody was blind. Not everybody was hypocritical. Not all rejected Jesus. Oh, I know. He was crucified. He was persecuted. It was continued even against the disciples. If you go into the book of Acts, you can find it there as well. But the church grew anyway. God was still working. He was still moving. God had great things in store if they would just keep on doing the work that they were called to do. God added to the church daily those that were being saved. I mentioned just a few here to you real quickly. In John chapter 17, verses 14 through 16, also verse 20, you can find that. Acts chapter 16, verses 29 through 31, also Romans 10, 9, and 13. God was coming through. God was giving people who would respond favorably. He was giving them new life. He was giving them a hope and a chance for heaven. It's easy for us to sometimes maybe even look down on what God is doing in certain areas. But we've got to be so careful we don't become the Pharisees, that we don't have him come among us and we don't even recognize him. Jesus actually indicated that sometimes we may, by even reaching out to those who are the least among us, we may actually be doing this for the Lord, and yet many times we may not recognize it's him. And if he were to step in among us today, we probably wouldn't recognize him. But oh, that God would help us to have the right spirit when he wants to speak. That we aren't among those who say, oh, I'm not interested. You get out of here. You don't know what you're talking about. Could I just apply it in closing here this evening? We've been given untold spiritual privileges. God has been so good to us. We have his word readily available. Probably numbers of you have multiple Bibles in your home. We have every opportunity to be saved. Now, I know we're not Jews. Many of us, at least, are not Jews. But he still calls us his own. He still reaches out to us. We are welcomed into his family. But could I ask you even this evening, with all that you know, all that we can see in his word, have you welcomed him into your own life? Have you received him? Don't be a rejecter. If necessary, be a repenter, if I could say it that way. Hopefully you already have. You already left your sin behind and you're serving the Lord. But God's mercy has reached out to us over and over and over. And it did even for the religious people of Jesus' day. He had reached out to them over and over. But could I just urge you even this evening, don't reject him this Christmas. But let him have his full right of way in your life. He still says, I want to come among you. I'm coming to my own. But do we receive what he has to say? Or do we resist? God help us to welcome him